teasing you a little bit, Captain Obvious over here. No, Magnus Carlsen does like to win every chess game he's ever played. You know what else Magnus does? He tends to play really good chess moves really fast.
He does do that, Captain Obvious, so thank you for joining me. Actually, you're more of Captain Underpants, but that's a different story. But what is a story of this particular game is that Magnus voluntarily doubled his own pawns. He could have captured back with the queen, but there are all sorts of knight forks in the air. So instead, we see this compromised pawn structure, but the bad news about double pawns is that it becomes harder to create a passer later. They can't protect one another. But the good news is the open file. So there is an open B file for one rook, an open D file for the other. But right now, Magnus has to figure out what to do with his bishop on G5. Does he capture this knight, Danny?
I love what you highlighted there. Plus, double pawns are weaker when they can be attacked. It's hard to attack those pawns right now, right? They're not on an open file themselves, so there's no rook coming to C8 for black. There are no pieces immediately coming after the C-pawns, and they kind of control the game right now. They control all the squares. They keep that knight on the rim, looking grim. So, yeah, these are those double pawns. It's one of those moves you see, and at first you go, ooh, classical chess principles, and then you go, oh, modern chess understanding. Double pawns for the win.
And, well, we have double isolated pawns for both sides. So this is not a recommended pawn structure for either player. So for those of you watching, both at home and in the live audience, try not to do this yourself because these pawns are hard to defend, particularly the lead pawn because it's closer to enemy territory, which means it's more approachable by enemy pieces. So, for example, black would love to get these two moves in and go after C4, but as we mentioned, there's an open file on the B line. That keeps the bishop tied down to B7. Rook coming to D1 would make a move like pawn D6. Well, now impossible. You can do it, but you just lose the pawn on the spot.
But Magnus gives up the pawn on E2 for compensation. The problem really with Han's position are those queenside pieces that are not playing, right? Your old school abusive chess coach would come over and just take them off the board and say, if you're not going to use them, I'm taking them, right? You say, that's toxic behavior. Don't treat me like that. But that's a different story. The point is, you got to get those pieces developed. They're not playing on A8 and C8, and that is a problem for Hans Neiman.
Well, he didn't take the pawn. He instead brought his knight to C5. That knight wants to get into F5, hit the H6 pawn and that D6 square, and this bishop is buried right now. So D6, it opens up that line, stops the knight from getting to F5, but as we see Magnus quickly retreat his knight, it's to open up the D file. But Danny, you mentioned it, the E2 pawn is still vulnerable. This is actually quite a dynamic position.
Yeah, and this is a big position to calculate a lot. Do you go for forcing variations here? Take E2, you trade for D6. Who gets the better of that at the end? The rooks are getting active. The files are opening up. Do you deal with B3 first? Exactly, you're highlighting all of it. Ultimately, if you take on B3 as black, you open that rook on A1, and then A7 is a potential problem down the A file. So yeah, we get to highlight and have fun up here with everyone else. But these are the variations that Hans is going to be calculating here, which is why he's taken a moment to think, flexing that time advantage.
Important that he keeps that lead on the clock because we've seen when he gets under the duress of time trouble, he is going to struggle against Magnus. And in this endgame, we see that black's pawns look worse on the surface, but I do like this rook on E2. It's super active here. It could slide behind either the C3 or the B3 pawns over here, but you do need to watch out because rook D8 check next. If white got a free turn, that actually wins material. With bishop H3 to follow, you got pile up pressure on pin pieces.
Yeah, and so Hans says, I'm not going to have any of that. I will develop. Hans plays bishop E6. Magnus immediately responds with B4. He's saying, I don't care about that C4 pawn. What's the compensation here? He wants rook D7, I guess, and it's just that. It's that simple and subtle, but sometimes Magnus makes chess look easy.
He does. He's just trying to gain control of a key square. Also, the F6 pawn is hanging behind the bishop, so he could go in that direction as well. Bishop takes C4. Bishop F1 is tempting. It won't work out, so that's why we see rook E8 give up A7. Danny, I mean, different pawns are hanging. It's hard to actually know what's what here, but there is some trouble for the white king, and that's why that rook stays parked on the first rank.
Yeah, you have to be careful. This is probably objectively should be a draw, and probably all the queenside pawns should come off for each other. And if that happens, maybe Magnus is happy, because at least then black's pawn structure is slightly weaker, right? Those doubled F pawns and weak H6 pawn, but isn't enough to win. That would be the question. But here we go. Magnus plays rook takes A7. We're going to get forcing lines. Does Hans have rook C1? That could get scary for Magnus. Yeah, here comes the checkmate.
I see what you want over there. And actually, we should pull up an analysis board because it's a very tricky line. If you think it's just about a pin on the first rank, it's not just that. Rook takes F1, king takes F1 to make that quick move. Bishop H3 check, the king moves out the way, and then rook E1 would be a checkmate. So be very careful about these sequences. But the key for white is that if rook takes F1, I think there's rook takes E6. You're trying to checkmate me on the light squares. I'm going to remove your greatest attacker, and you see that the engine favors white because the endgame is nice. The B7 pawn will fall after both those rooks come off the board.
Move, king, get out the way, checkmate for Hans. He would love that. Hoping to get his first win here. I'm gonna be honest or be a little personally biased. I'm hoping for Hans to get his first win. I want to see it. I want to see Hans strike here and get a dub. But I don't think Magnus blunders into those types of tactics. And now Hans is getting under 30 seconds, which makes you even more nervous because very few enter these types of situations against Magnus Carlsen and come out alive to talk about it.
Yeah, he probably is looking at the c3 pawn, which can be captured, but then white plays c5, and suddenly there's a clamp down the queen side. That b7 pawn cemented in place. It's a target looking suddenly in huge time trouble.
Yeah, and ultimately plays a move you don't want to see with bishop c8. It's a passive move. Magnus could come back to d1 and take care of problems, but then c3 falls. Again, objectively, we're looking at a very equal position. I guess, you know, the evaluation bar, the opinion of the computer reveals as much. But you know that Magnus is going to do the thing he does to just pose problems.
Oh, wait. No, now it works.
Now it works.
Yes, because there is no rook sacrifice on e6, and Hans is having a problem here. I'm not sure what, but something has gone wrong.
I have no idea what's going on. He plays rook c1, king to g2. He takes f1, and he's just winning.
Yes.
Magnus shakes his head. He's just blundered.
He did, and that's what bishop c8 was so brilliant, because he gets out the way from a counter sacrifice. That rook needed to take the bishop in the other variation, and now we see a position where white actually has 3 pawns for a bishop. That seems to be an equivalent point value, but it's not just about the materials with king safety. It's about how players can proceed from here, and it's those light squares that are a devastating problem for white.
Devastating problems on the clock. If Hans doesn't focus, he's complaining about something. The Arbiter is watching. We also have a camera on the board. We can confirm in real time everything the players see and how it aligns exactly with the server. So if Hans Neiman is trying to play the Vladimir Kramnik gambit here, it's not going to work. There are no situations where the clock is not under thorough review. I'm not sure what he was complaining about there, but it looked like he was saying that my clock was jumping.
Well, they're definitely going to review it afterwards. We have cameras behind the players, as we've seen. So if there is something that needs to be reviewed, of course it will be reviewed. I mean, that's just fair play for all. And in this position, I mean, we still do have 3 pawns extra for white, an extra bishop for black. That material dynamic, it's important, but even more important, the utmost importance is king safety, and that white king is in huge trouble.
Yeah, and the bishop comes to e6. The white king is in huge trouble. Hans Neiman should get his first win here. He's close, but Magnus Carlsen is not going to lie down. Here come the double rooks, though. And Hans, by the way, finds this with just a couple seconds, which is brilliant chess. Will he get enough here? Doesn't want to settle on the draw. Okay, he couldn't take c4. Yes, because a rook takes c4.
But he's just going after the white king. You could take b7, but then you get checkmated on the first rank. One of these rooks is going to do the damage. So you see a resignation, and that's Hans'
like
first
that,
win.
Hans Neiman gets his first win of the match. He's complaining about something. We're going to figure that out. We've got cameras on the board. We will be able to confirm anything like we said. And to be sure, we will also be able to align what happened on the screen with the server there. So Magnus kind of waiting to see what's going on. And I think we will pause the clock to allow Game Ops and the Arbiters to review. I am not necessarily worried that we won't have the information, but Hans is definitely worried that something's going on here, Robert.
Yeah, and it's, I think, the players' rights to see if there has been an issue. There is video to review, so everyone can take a look at that, and the team is going to work hard and look into it. But I think that actually is an uncomfortable moment for the players. I mean, you see that it's now a 2-point spread once again, so Hans gets a much-needed victory, and now we may get a pause in the match, and who does that impact more?
Well, you mentioned a pause in the match. We should confirm for all the fans. The match clock is paused. There is no time ticking while we resolve this, so it will not affect anything. And Hans Neiman, maybe a good moment for him to pause, too. He did just get his first win, so if we're just talking about the match real quick and we assume the drama will get resolved, we should definitely highlight that Hans Neiman should be feeling pretty good right now. He just won as black in a game that was wild, and despite what he was nervous about, whatever happened, he managed to win.
We see Judith, our arbiter there, talking to Hans.
Shout out to Judith.
And Judith always working hard behind the scenes and here in the scene. But for Judith, this is something that is part of her job. And Hans seems livid about something. And I mean, just judging from his interview yesterday, that's, I guess, to be somewhat expected. But if there is something that happened in the game, it didn't impact the result. But still, the players don't want to have to deal with any issues. So they will review the tape.
And it's the right thing to do, to pause for a moment to ensure there actually are no issues. We do not believe that there are, but we don't know. GameOps is reviewing, which means we're going to pause and take a quick technical break to give them time to do their job. So don't go anywhere, everyone. You knew you were going to get more than just the chess on the board. You've got drama right now, and we're going to see what's happening when we come back. We will have an update for you.